Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to begin now. I'm going to begin, coming ready or not, the next session. The next session, this session, will be about the economic situation. Pak John Conroy, Pak Terry Howe, mohon perhatian dari Pak Terry. Ini soalnya ya, ini orang Jogja selalu begitu ya. They don't take any notice of any of us. So everybody, if you're, hello Merle Reckliffe, I see Merle over there, hello Merle. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. We're a little bit behind time. Traditionally, the next session, the second session of the Indonesia Update is about the economy. And traditionally, we have the author or the authors of the next survey of recent developments. As many of you will know, the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies produces 3 surveys of recent developments each year. And we have Jason Allford and Ibu Moekti from Indonesia. Jason is from the Treasury and was posted in Jakarta for several years. And Jason has just gone back for a couple of weeks to gather material for the survey. Ibu Moekti is a graduate from the ANU, and she has recently been working for 2 years with the USAID SEADI project in Jakarta. So she didn't have to go back to Jakarta. She was posted in Jakarta, and she has been following economic developments very closely. Now, after we have our 2 speakers, kurang lebih roundabout 15 minutes, a little bit more, 15, 17 minutes for each of you, Jason and Ibu Moekti. After Ibu Moekti, we will have Ibu Mira from the University of Canberra, who will give us, from NATSEM, who will give us a comment on the survey. So Jason and Moekti are going to divide up their time. Silakan Pak, silakan Pak Jason.
Terima kasih Pak Peter. So I'm still having trouble getting used to the Indonesian sense of fashion and sense of humour. Moekti and Mira told me today was Blue Shirt Day, but then they turned up in batik, so obviously I've made a faux pas. And Peter did slightly exaggerate my experience. I actually had 2 years in the finance ministry in Jakarta, which was great, but I'm awed by the amount of experience on Indonesia in this room. And can I say, the number of people who are claiming to have been at the first of these updates, either some of them are lying or it was a group of very enthusiastic 12-year-olds, I think. So Moekti and I, as Peter said, I had 2 weeks in Jakarta and we did some interviews. Heading into that 2 weeks in late August, we were both a bit nervous because when we looked at the Jakarta press or the Indonesian press looking for stories that we could use in our survey, what we saw was what you saw in the last session. It was Jokowi, 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 and by the way, the economy's still fine. And that's what we kept getting. But then in late August, it was Jokowi, 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 Jokowi. And by the way, the stock market just dropped 20%. So we were probably the most pleased people to see the Jakarta stock market drop 20%. So let me start. So an overview of what we're going to present today. I think, my top point there, bottom line is coming into 2013, the Indonesian economy looked pretty solid. And that's probably still a reasonably fair characterisation. What we're going to do in our presentation is pull out some of the pressures that we were seeing in the economy. So the 3 I've named there, the withdrawal of quantitative easing in the US, which is putting pressure on global financial markets and how that's affecting Indonesia. The Indonesian balance of payments position is worsening. Indonesian inflation's quite a bit higher than it has been. There are some reasons for that we'll talk about. So we're going to pull out a few of those particular things that have been happening in the Indonesian economy and creating comment, putting a bit of pressure on. And then we're going to talk about the government's response to those, an economic policy package that they brought in on 23rd of August, and some of the elements of that. And to preempt the ending a little bit, our thesis is that these pressures from time to time are going to come on the economy. The economy looks fundamentally strong, but you're going to get these pressures. But the government is always very reactive to these pressures. and maybe that's fine, maybe there are elements of these policy packages that are okay, but what's missing in Indonesia, what's missing in the Indonesian debate on the Indonesian economy is a focus on the longer term reforms, the reforms that are going to build the flexibility of the economy and push out the growth potential. And that's it's a cheap point in a way, because those types of reforms are tough, but that's where we get to at the end. So every economist's favourite starting point, the chart of annual GDP growth. A bit of a defence for starters. I'm not an economist who thinks this is important in and of itself. The reason we talk about the economy, the reason we talk about growth, is because it's a precondition for the things that are important, the things like education, the things like healthcare, the things like the environment. So the state of the economy is an enabler, and I'd like to acknowledge that, and I think a lot of you in the room would agree with me. The question how much we drill into what the economy means for those things, we probably don't do that too much, and maybe some of that can come out in the Q&A. But anyway, I think this chart shows my high-level point. This is GDP growth for 10 years for Indonesia. You can see it's a good performance over a long period of time. And if I showed you a chart of inflation, I think pretty much a similar story. A good performance over a long period of time. And this is really to Indonesia's credit, these sustained, solid performances. You can argue maybe should be a bit better. Fine, should be a bit better, but good performance over a long period of time. And I think the policy point on that, the high-level point, good macro outcomes, broad acceptance of a solid macroeconomic framework. So monetary policy targeting inflation, fiscal frameworks aimed at long-term sustainability of public finances. These things have been in place for a long time. They've survived many different presidents, different central bank governors, different finance ministers, a parliament that's not afraid to assert its independence on these issues. There is broad public acceptance of these high-level macro outcomes. Just a little comment how this affects the recent thing. That little tailing off at the end was actually causing concern for some of the people that we spoke to in Jakarta in terms of a slowing economy. But you can see, put in a long-term context, growth that was coming in at 5.8% by June this year, not such a big problem and doesn't look like a big problem on this chart. So some of those pressures that I talked about, the first one, quantitative easing. So what is quantitative easing first? Well, I guess it's a code for fairly loose monetary policy around the world. So you've had a lot of particularly advanced economies growing very slowly over the past couple of years. What that's meant is that authorities in those countries have tended to have quite low interest rates, trying to support the economy. Low interest rates in advanced economies, lower growth prospects. What you get in Indonesia, higher interest rates, better growth prospects. It was a good situation for Indonesia. It was encouraging investors to come to the country to invest. That investment was supporting growth. So quite a good scenario for Indonesia over the past 2 years. But what Indonesian authorities knew and what they'd been worried about was that once the rest of the world moves to normalise monetary policy, once they stop some of those unusual policies that are trying to support growth, then there will be an adjustment period going backwards. And that's exactly what we got a taste of in August, so started to happen. So speculation in the US about when quantitative easing would be tapered started to put pressure on financial markets. And I'll show you a couple of charts that bring this out. So this one is a chart for 2013. The blue line is the Jakarta, the composite stock price index. The red line is the rupiah exchange rate to the US. So you can see pretty good story for the first half of the year, but then particularly when you get to August, when you get to that speculation around when interest rates might rise in the US, those capital flows change, suddenly the exchange rate depreciates quickly, suddenly the stock market drops quickly, and those types of pressures start to make people nervous. As an aside, I'm not going to give a commentary on the merits of QE in the US. As far as we're concerned, it's just a given. Another chart here, government bond yields. So you can see Indonesia, so this chart's over a much longer period, more like 10 years. You can see Indonesian bond yields heading down, particularly towards the end. So the cost of government financing was much, much lower, which was a very good situation for the Indonesian government, which has been bringing down its debt burden anyway, but with low interest rates, that's much easier. But you can see at the end there that these pressures starting to come to play, Indonesian bond yields went up from 5.5% to 8.5%. So you can get these big movements as these pressures start to play out. I've done a back of the envelope calculation, which is partly not valid, and I'll explain why. But Indonesia has about, I think, $200 billion $200 billion US dollars worth of debt. About 140 billion of that's in government bonds and 60 billion in other forms of debt. If you map through a 3% rise in interest rates to that whole stock of debt, that's going to cost you $6 billion a year. So that's a back-of-the-envelope calculation because these interest rates would take time to flow through. They'd flow in different ways to different forms of debt. It would take a long time. But you can see that these types of changes can mean real things for public finances. $6 billion or $3 billion or $1 billion is a lot of money that you can do other things with. So these are real pressures that Indonesia needs to think about. The second pressure that I mentioned that's been playing out in Indonesia is balance of payments. So this chart, the black line shows you the balance of payments, broken up into two components. The red part is the current account, which is basically your trade balance pretty much, with a few other income transactions. So the bulk of it is exports minus imports. And the capital account, which is your financial transactions. The balance of payments is the sum of those two. So typically Indonesia, over quite a long period of time, has run a current account surplus. And that's the kind of development model that you see in a lot of other countries in Asia that financial markets like to see. Again, an aside, a current account deficit isn't necessarily a problem, but we don't intend to get into that argument. But the example, obvious one, is Australia, which has run a current account deficit for the, 200 years or longer, ever since we started trading with the rest of the world. And our world hasn't ended yet, depending on your politics, I guess. Anyway, I'm getting off the track. But I'm not making a point about the merits of deficits and surpluses, but I guess a large balance of payments deficit can put pressures on your economy that you might need to deal with. And if you think back to the Asian financial crisis, you can see some of those pressures coming out. So these types of charts that show the balance of payments shifting into deficit do start to worry policymakers. The third pressure, and I'll hand over to Moekti, I'll just introduce this chart. So the red line shows inflation, which had been running along sort of 4 to 5% in Indonesia, level everyone was very comfortable with, but more recently shifted up to a little bit over 8%, and that's something financial markets are starting to sit up and take notice of. We've put two other lines on there. We've put the blue line showing the food component of the inflation, and the red line, the dash, getting my colours wrong, I'm a bit colourblind. The blue line is the food inflation, and the green dashed line is transportation inflation. Moekti will tell you a little bit about that, but the food is very volatile. The transport component largely relates to the reduction in fuel subsidies that the Indonesian government did this year. And Moekti will come back and talk about those. But the point of putting those two other lines on that chart is policymakers will often try to look through these things. So in some ways, the increase in inflation up to 8% isn't as concerning because it's coming from policy measures that they know about, or it's coming from volatile things where the prices might be reversed. But I'll hand over to Moekti now, and she'll go into that in a bit more detail.
Okay, yes, silakan. Yeah, Well, thanks very much, Jason. Ibu Moekti, as I said, has been working in Jakarta for a couple of years with the USAID SEADI project. She and Jason have been working together as a team, so Ibu Moekti will now carry this forward. Makasih, Ibu.
Thank you, Pak Peter. It's glad for me to back to Canberra after 4 years here under Hull Hill, so it's really nice to see same offices and then same faces. So I really honored to become a speaker on this Indonesian update. So this is my third Indonesian update. I mean, as a participant and also the speaker. On 2010, I was being a discussant. It's also because of Hull's kindness. And today I will speak on the economic update. Just following up what Jason already mentioned about the inflation. As you can see on the chart, that in the beginning of 2013, the inflation is still fine, but then in March, there's a huge increase in the food inflation, and it's actually because a result of the government regulation, which is the restriction of the horticultural import. So in March, there's a big price change in onion, garlic, and red chilies, which is because of the import restriction that the horticultural import can only be done in the several port, but not in Tanjung Priok. That really makes the domestic prices of food increases. And later on, in April and May, the inflation is declining. But then in June, that time, because of the fuel subsidy, becomes a burden for the budget. And then finally, the government, although it's actually a little bit too late, but it's still, finally, the government decided to reduce the fuel subsidy. And as the result, we can see that in June and July, the transportation inflation is increased quite so big. I think the timing of the fuel subsidy is not correct, because July is when also the new school year, when the expenditure of the household is already high because of the school year, and also is approaching the Lebaran. So that's the timing is not quite good. So finally, the government decided to reduce the fuel subsidy on June 22nd. So before, the premium it's 4,500. With the reduction of the subsidy, becomes 6,500 per liter, and also diesel up from 4,500 to 5,500 per liter. As I mentioned, it's a little bit too late. So if government did this fuel subsidy back in 2011, actually it's much better. But that time, the president said that he worried about the election in 2014. But actually, Indonesia is easily to forget. So when you did it in 2011, or maybe 2012, now it's more chance for the SBY to not to get elected, but at least not very negative view for him. And then we know that the inflation, the increase of fuel price will affect everyone, the richest and also the poor. But then government already prepared some cushion for the poor. So they have this BLSM, which is in the beginning, BLSM is the temporary direct cash transfer to the poor. In the beginning, is also some rejection on this BLSM, because they're afraid that this will tied to the election. So it's kind of the money politics. But then the government have this program of the BLSM, which is cover almost 40% of 25% of the poor people. And then the distribution of the BLSM also quite good for 2 stages of the BLSM. The first one is between July and August. The coverage is like 93%, which means that it's really right targeted to the poor people who are eligible to those assistance. And then the second stage, which is starting the beginning of September until today, the coverage is already 83%. However, although the government already reduced the fuel subsidy, but actually the fuel subsidy burden to the budget is still quite high. As you can see in this graph, we compare 2013 initial budget, and then 2013 revised budget, and then 2014 planned budget. You can see that although in the red bar is when the government already reduced the subsidy of fuel, but because of the price of fuel and also the exchange rate movement, actually the actual expenditure for the fuel subsidy is still higher than the planned one. And then if you can, the worrying thing about this graph is that if you compare the subsidy with the education and health expenditure, we can see that there's a unfairness in here, because the one who usually enjoying the fuel subsidy is the middle up people, while health and education is really needed by everyone, especially the poor one. So we can see the unfairness here, that the expenditure for education and health is very low. Okay. So with the economic development, that the inflation is high, like almost 8%. The exchange rate also depreciating so quickly, reaches like 10, because there's a psychological level that once the exchange rate hit 10,000 rupiah per dollar, then the market start reacting negatively. So that time, the exchange rate start depreciating very quickly, reach 10,000 and then 11 and almost 12,000. And also the deficit of current account also becomes bigger and bigger. And then government is also experiences in back in 1998 and 2008. Then the government had this policy package exactly 4 weeks ago, 23rd of August on Friday. And then the pairs or the market sees it as a emergency package. And some of them quote it as the stimulus package. But actually, if we see the package truly, it's not really the stimulus package. Because although the package aimed to reduce the import and also boost the export, maintain the growth and maintain the purchasing power, it means that maintain the employment, also combat inflation and increase the investment, there's nothing in that package that announced in 23rd of August really hit the problem directly. So, for example, for the balance of payment, the government, the measures that government took is very small and will not resolve the condition quickly. Just like the same, it's all rhetoric, like try to increase the export and have limit the import using the higher import tax. And also, one thing that they do for limiting the import is to increase the usage of the biodiesel, with the logic that if the increase of domestic biodiesel increase, mean the import of diesel can be decreased, and then the current account can improve. But actually, the increase of usage of biodiesel is not that easy. Maybe the supplier ready to sell the biodiesel, but how about the consumer? The electricity company, are their machinery ready to have the higher percentage of biodiesel in their machine? So I think although all the measure is have a good intention, but it's not really what the market expected. So, and then it's reflected in the reaction of the market. Nothing changed after the announcement of this package in 23rd of August. So actually, on the balance of payment, there are several measures, biodiesel, and also they want to delay the implementation of the raw material export quotas and tax. But this one also, until today, there's no further regulation that decided by the government how to deal with it. In fact, there's still, from the parliament and also the Ministry of Energy and Resource, Energy and the Mineral Resource, they still insist that they will apply the tax on minerals next year, 2014. So this uncertainty makes the market still nervous. On the growth and also to keep the inflation low, I think 2-3 weeks ago, there's a tempe and tahu crisis in Indonesia. Because, and it's really bothering, because we always thought that tempe and tahu is something that's really close to Indonesia. We have to have that tempe and tahu, but actually, the soybean, most of the soybean are imported. Especially for the tempe producer. Why? Because the imported beans is bigger, so it's better for the tempe. But for tahu, since they will just crush all the soybean, it really doesn't matter whether this is domestic soybean or imported soybean. So to handle this crisis, then the government react by relaxing the regulation of the import for soybeans. So now more companies can have the license to import the soybean. Even the cooperative for tempe and tahu producer can also import the soybean. But it's create another problem, because cooperatives doesn't know how to import. They don't have money to import. They don't know the procedure. They don't have a contract with the US producer of soybean, and they don't know once the soybean came to Indonesia how they distribute it among the members. So that's why our assessment to the policy package then is always reactive and without further thinking. So there's a tempe tahu crisis, okay, give the import license, and now I think yesterday the Ministry of Trade agreed to abolish the import for soybean. But I don't know about the Ministry of Finance because it should be goes to the Ministry of Finance. And there's also a lack of coordination among the ministries. For example, on the mineral tax and quota, Ministry of Finance wants to postpone the implementation of those regulations. But as I mentioned earlier, the Parliament and the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources keep insisting that they want to apply this regulation. This inconsistency and lack of coordination among the ministries also reflected in the investment. Then the investment in mining or others will also decline because there's an uncertainty on those issues. So the good thing that we think about this regulation, at least the government show the intention that they try to use this bad economic condition to make a good policy measure, because it happened in the past and it's successful. But unfortunately, this one not happening. Maybe because this condition is not too bad. So usually the bad economy create a good policy measure. So maybe it's not too bad, but we don't want to have the worst economic condition. And then the second one, approaching the election year next year, I think there's no political support. So although the Ministry of Finance, Minister of Trade really wants to have a very bold economic reform, but if there's no political support from the government, from the parliament, then it's not easy to have this kind of a bold economic policy reform. So our last slide. So we hope that next year, hopefully, there's still some people in the government thinking about the state, not just their candidacy as a president or thinking about their party. So we hope that the reactive policy like this one is not a priority. So they have to think through, not just treat the symptom, but they have to go through the source of the problem in the economy. And then to have Indonesia have a very good potential economic, but we need to boost the flexibility and growth potential through economic reform. And as mentioned, it's really need the political support for that. And with this better outcomes in better or higher growth, it can provide a better outcomes in health, education, and environment. And then third, actually, now there are already some example of progress, especially in the financial sector. So during that turbulence time when the exchange rate starting to depreciate and then the stock exchange market dropped very sharply, now government have what's called it FKSSK, or Forum Koordinasi Stabilitas Sistem Keuangan, or Coordination Forum for Financial System Stability. So this forum meet regularly and they can come up with the decision that sensible, that can resolve the problem. Actually, the market react positively, not when the policy package itself announced, but after the Bank Indonesia raised the policy rate from 6.75 to 7, and then later on in September, increase again to 7.25. Okay, Pak Peter. So our hope, I think this is our highest hope, that the whoever becomes a president next year, he or she can have the strong economic team. And then this economic team also have the, not just afraid that the economic team have this very narrow nationalistic ideal that no import, everything have to be made domestically. So we really hope that the new president can champion the reform and have a very strong economic team. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Bu Moekti. We now have as our first commentator this morning, Ibu Riyana Miranti from the University of Canberra. She's known biasanya disebut Ibu Mira. Mira is from the University of Canberra. She is a PhD graduate here from the Australian National University. She's a modeller. She spends a lot of her time working on modelling issues and has been at the University of Canberra now, I think, for 6 tahun, ya, almost 6 years. Baiklah, makasih Ibu Mira. Silakan, 10 minit ya, Bu.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Pak Peter. Thank you so much for Hal for inviting me to be a discussant at this really amazing Indonesian update. And it is really a pleasure to be here. I mean, I'll be back here. I was a student between 2003 2007. And then I really enjoy Mbak Uti and Jason's presentation about this economics update, and then learning so much as well about what's going on in our beautiful country, Indonesia. So just to summarize a little bit about what Uti and Jason discussed, is the main issues. We have the macroeconomic shocks, and then other related issues happening about food crisis, and then they also discuss about the government strategies to solve these issues. I guess I really agree what the observation and the assessment, but I think I'm just questioning whether then just learning from the past, we'll be actually going to experience another crisis, rupiah really depreciated quite substantially, actually. It's almost 11,000, I think, by yesterday. Or is it really only a short-term shock? And then whether these strategies, the solution is actually sustainable or provide a long-term solution. And then I think the argument from the presenters maybe not. And then learning from the past as well, I think is we kind of seeing that all the sometimes is the solution is preventive action. So this is happening, so we are doing this, and not really trying to be reactive and then develop a better policy. So what is actually really worrying me is about that, like Mbak Uti says, about this crisis of tempe and tahu. I think is like the price increases, and then also we have a period when also a crisis for the beef meat as well. So I'm just thinking, what is the strategies actually to solve this? I mean, maybe we should look back on the agricultural policy again. I mean, strengthening this sector, by increasing farming agricultural productivity by various differentiation strategies. We have issue of food security, self-sufficiency, but it's not actually necessary that the self-sufficiency is that means food security, on the other way around. And I think there was actually a law about in 2009 law about sustainable protection of agricultural land for crop farming, and then but this has to be probably more consistently implemented, and therefore increase the farmer welfare, perhaps also diversification for rice production to high value crops. And then I think improving infrastructure. I mean, I think it's really important to strengthen the supply chain for agricultural inputs, and also for accessing for example, credits for the farmers. And then it's been a while that we haven't actually heard about what's happening in Indonesia in the context of cooperation with the Asian ASEAN as the regional cooperation. So I don't know whether there is something that we can do in collaboration with these other Asian countries. I think there are also there has been a recent step in establishing regional emergency stockpile of rice, for example, signed between the Asian plastic countries. The other things that I observed from the presentation is about what's happening, and then less about what are the implications of these macro shocks and everything. And then like real wages surely decline because of inflation, for example, and then what are the implications for like standard of living, poverty, and inequality, like what is the implication for people who are vulnerable to poverty, although there may be an issue of lags here. And in the past of 10 years, I think inequality has been already increasing in Indonesia, although without this pressure. So I'm just like really interested to see what are the implications or expected implications of this. The other thing that probably like are important, I'm a socioeconomist. So I'm really interested to look at the well-being or welfare of people. And then I think it has been argued about that macroeconomic performance is not the end, but the end is actually the highest standard of living. I will argue the other way around is actually also important, because then when you have a higher standard of living, you'll be able to be like poverty reduced, you'll be more productive, and then also it's good, like conducive for creating economic growth as well. And then I read one article on the other day from Pat Ross about like 3 fundamental goals of economic policy, which is growth, equity, and stability. And then in particular point, I'll be really interested to focusing on equity and well-being. And then I think at the moment in Indonesia, I think there are some challenges. I think the challenges ahead is the launch of the new national security, social security system, which will be launched in 2014. One of area covered here is about the health. And then there's still like a big question is for me is like how to increase the supply side of the support, like how to increase the facility, equipment, medical supplies, healthcare professionals, and say how to prepare the administration and also the government, the governance. Is it financially sustainable in the long run? We don't know. I mean, like it's because this will be like universal policy. And then I think we also probably need to manage the expectation, like learning from experience from the other countries, whether like my expectation it will not be happening straight away. It will take like some time. It will take a while for like to cover the entire population. And then I think like needs to have strategies to increase the awareness of the program. And then what is the position of like regional, some of our regions actually have the regional social security system, and how does it fit with the universal things? And then like we'll be a discussion about which one is better, whether the social security like really targeted to the poor, or this is like universal kind of policy. The other thing is there has been a new data set published, this is PPLS 2011, Pendataan Program Perlindungan Sosial, which is a unified database in covering the 40% of the poorest population, which will be used to target integrated social assistance program. But then my question is like, how is the usage of this data? I mean, have been this actually used, or whether like it has been actually used for research to really improving the welfare in Indonesia. The other thing is the challenges that are probably in regards to this is like a well-being across the life course. I mean, this probably not really, like we know in Australia, population aging is really like one of the really crucial, important topics. But in Indonesia, we have actually rising aging population as well. I think the growth is like double of the labor force. And then this is actually related to the discussion of social security, like because financial support for older adults is more likely depend on the family. So it's actually a challenge. The other thing is like children and young people as well. This is like the health and education. Recently been discussed about like a double burden of malnutrition. Like people and children in Indonesia is also not only underweight but also overweight. So and then also the issue of child protection, child labor, and compromised education. There's also like UNICEF launched a new report about children with disability as well. So I think the last one is, I will also like thinking about the spatial differences that this is my research area, regional poverty disparities process, and what actually are the role of decentralization, and what are for example, the expected role of the MP3EI economic corridor, the Indonesian economic master plan. But I'm sure a lot of our speakers will talk about this, and then probably I will just leave them here. Okay, thank you very much.
Baiklah, terima kasih Bu Mira. Well, now it's time for questions. We've got roughly half an hour, maybe just a shade longer than that. So I'll take questions in groups of 3, but I do know that we have one quite well-known economist and commentator in the room. That's Pak Manggi Habir. I'd like Pak Manggi Habir to say something, and then Howard Dick has been waving his hand, so I've got one there, and a third. I'll take a third. Dari depan here, Pak Bambang. So 1, 2, 3. Pak Manggi, silakan.
Thank you, Pak Peter. I don't have a comment, but I do have a question, and this is for Ibu Moekti and Pak Jason. I liked your last slide, which is 2014. I think what everybody is concerned about. My question is, what do you expect the economic indicators to look like in an election year? Because I think that's what everybody's a bit concerned about. I mean, I left Jakarta on Wednesday night, and the exchange rate was already 11,500. And I was asking the bank traders, and they were saying it went up as high as 12,000. So it's still weakening. The question that I have is, if you were going to give advice to the new government being formed in 2014, and looking at Indonesia being quite vulnerable to external shocks, especially the economy, what kind of structural policies that you would advise the new government to do to ensure that we are not as susceptible to external shocks? Maybe that's what my question is. Thanks.
Baiklah, terima kasih Pak Manggi. And then Howard Dick from, if we could, if there is a microphone for Pak Howard. Ya, tunggu dulu sebentar Pak Howard. Ini. Makasih ya. Thank you, Howard.
There, so my question goes in a similar direction. I think Pak James and Bu Moekti have told a good story, but it seems to me that it's cautious and probably too optimistic. I'm getting old and I can't remember whether I was at the first update or not. But I can remember I was in the update in September 1997, and we nodded in the room and said, yes, Indonesia's economic fundamentals are sound. Unfortunately, it unraveled very quickly over the next 3 or 4 months. And I do see, like Pak Manggi, perhaps a lot of vulnerability at the moment when you are running a rather large current account deficit. There's a lot of vulnerability to capital outflow, and there are good reasons now why that may happen, because quantitative easing, well, the tap's going to be turned off and interest rates will rise. So I think the question is, could you be more explicit about the vulnerability to external shocks and the way that might feed into the election next year? It won't be an easy time to make significant adjustments. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. So the question is about external shocks, vulnerability to external shocks, and so on. Pak Bambang from Tempo. Makasih, Pak.
Thank you. I'm Bambang Harimurti from Tempo. I want to ask the panelists, how come the pressure from the Serikat Buruh is not mentioned in your analysis, which is quite headlines in the media? And also, how come you don't put in your graph about the increasing inequality, Gini coefficients, and also whether poverty level is going up or down? You know, that should be the aim of macroeconomic policy. Thank you.
Baiklah, terima kasih Pak. So how will we? Okay, silakan. Yeah.
So I'll do the first 2 questions. So my day job in Australia is as an economic forecaster. And those of you who follow the Australian news and Australian budgets would know how well we've been forecasting the budget position for Australia. So now you're asking me to give forecasts for a country that I've been in for 2 years. So of course I'll go ahead and do it. I think you don't know. You can try to forecast, but the bottom line is you don't know. There's an incredible amount of variation around your central forecasts. And when you talk to people in financial markets and they're worried about exchange rates and things, that's fine. But what I don't understand is, did financial markets not know that the US was going to have to normalise monetary policy at some point? Did they really not know that? Did they not know the timing would be sometime in the next couple of years? So how do you get from that to explain why the rupiah has moved so much, why Indonesian interest rates have moved by 300 basis points all over a couple of months? Now, none of that makes sense to me, and that makes me very cautious about giving forecasts for the economy. What that means to me is you need to have a set of economic policies, a set of economic institutions that are robust to a variety of different outcomes, that can handle different things that might hit the economy. And I guess that's where Moekti and I are getting to with really, the reactive stuff is fine. You do have various policies you can use. You can use monetary policy, you can use capital controls. Fiscal policy is harder, but you can think about that in certain places. They're strengthening their financial market supervision. So you've got a bunch of things happening that will help, that you can use in a crisis. But the bottom line is, what you really need to be doing is putting in place the policies that make your economy respond more flexibly to any set of external conditions it faces, and as far as possible push out the production frontier, so you've got as much money to play with as possible, you've got as strong an economy as possible. In terms of the details of those policies, I can name some areas, but to be honest, I'm not an expert. So we had a dry run of this presentation on Wednesday, and we gave a laundry list of policies. The comment coming back was, well, tell us about them. The answer is I don't really know a lot of detail. But it's things like labour market reform, it's competition policy, it's the role of state-owned enterprises in the economy in Indonesia, which is making foreign investors nervous. It means that they can act as a constraint on competition in the economy. I'm sure you can name 10 other things that the government needs to focus on. And our criticism is not, by all means criticise us for not advancing specific policies, but I guess our core point is there doesn't even seem to be a serious debate going on about any of these things in Indonesia. There doesn't seem to be an obvious place where this debate emanates from. So you've got a few think tanks in the private sector, a few academic economists who talk about this stuff. One of them who used to do it is now inside government, and that happens from time to time and sort of constrains. Well, hopefully they have the opportunity to advance some of that, but it also constrains what they do. So in a sense, I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I think your question is getting to the exact point of concern that we're trying to raise. And I guess some of that answer would also go to the second question that what are the chances of a crisis next year? Well, who knows? Am I someone who can tell you? Not really. But what you have to do is have the policy tools in place to respond to that when it comes. There's probably not much point coming up with a bunch of policies and dressing them up as a fiscal stimulus or dressing them up as a crisis management policy and allowing that to be seen as your response. What you need are real policy responses. So Moekti mentioned the interest rate increase and a couple of the capital controls that BI did as being the most successful responses to this current crisis. Strengthen financial market supervision, strengthen those bits of the economy that you think are important to the operation of the economy. And beyond that, it's all these really hard policies that require a lot of work to get in place that I just mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Trying to answering the question is actually a tough question. First about the Pak Bambang question about the upah minimum inequality and the poverty rate. I know that those issues are important, but because of the limited of time, we have to really choose what we present here, but we are preparing the survey, so we will address also that issues in our survey. For the upah minimum, just recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, there's a big demonstration in Jakarta that the labor union in Jakarta asked for another increase in the minimum wage to 3.5 million rupiah, which is like 350 Australian dollar. So actually, that's quite concerning for the business sector. So also related to the vulnerability to the external shock, Indonesia is very vulnerable through the for the external shock because, as we know, Indonesia is like to consume. Most of the GDP is the consumption part of GDP is quite high. We like to consume, but we cannot really produce it ourselves. Why? Because the labor condition is not good. The labor market in Indonesia is very strict, and then also the productivity of the labor is not high. So for the point of view of the businessman, if the labor productivity is good, like increasing, so they don't mind to increase the wages. But the problem is they ask for increases the wages, but the productivity never increase, but actually declining. The more worrying issue is, although they ask for increasing the upah minimum in Jakarta, so there's a option for the business to relocate their industry from Jakarta to other location. If it's still in Indonesia, it's okay. For example, I heard from Ibu Risma, the Wali Kota of Surabaya, that she already accepted several firms relocated from Jakarta to Surabaya, which is good for the Surabaya, and also is also good to distribute the economic activity to outside Jakarta. But the worrying is if the businessman then decided to relocate it outside Indonesia because of uncertainty, high uncertainty in Indonesia. The labor condition, the investment condition, and the worst thing is the infrastructure condition. So although the MP3 already progressing, although slowly, then the infrastructure is really the key for better or the higher growth. Not just to transport the production from the goods produced from one location to other, but also like the food, distribution of the food and everything. So the cost of living in Indonesia is high because of this weak infrastructure condition in Indonesia. The inequality Gini coefficient increases, not because that some people said that the poor getting poorer and the richer getting richer, but actually everyone better off, but the rate of increase in the richer is higher than the rate of increase in the poor. So means that the difference between the richer and the poorer becomes bigger. But both of the richer and the poorer are better off. That's the also we can see from the poverty rate. It's decreasing in the last in June data, which is using the March data. I don't remember the number exactly, but it's the poverty rate is decreasing. So for me, the policy that should be if I have to advise the next government, like we have to go to the basic, which is investment infrastructure. Those things are really important to have a more a stronger economic growth, which is based on the our own production. Doesn't mean that we have to produce everything domestically, which is there's the tendency now that everything should be produced in Indonesia, and we have to have a higher value added. That's the reason behind the tax on the mineral goods, have to have a higher value added. But more of it like how we provide the employment to Indonesian people. And employment doesn't have to be domestic, solely for the domestic firm, but we also welcome the foreign investment. So hopefully that the question satisfy you. Thank you.
Makasih Bu Moekti. I'll now have 3 more questions. I'll just have them up the center actually. So Bob Lowy, Chris Manning, and then one up the back there. And then we'll have some others later. 1, 2, 3, up the middle. Bob Lowy.
As a non-economist, it's a bit daunting to ask a question, but if we recall the recent Australian elections, we had the re-emergence of economic nationalism. Pretty late in the piece, I must admit, but it was there. And it's a more powerful force, of course, in Indonesia, and for different reasons, of course. Partly because you need some of it to finance the political system, and partly because you need it to balance the private sector power of the Chinese investment or business community. And my question is, how do you see this playing out in the elections coming up next year, both the parliamentary and the presidential elections?
The second question in the middle here, microphone for Chris. Oh, Chris Manning already has one, so could we pass the microphone up to... Silakan, Chris.
I wonder if I could make a comment in defence, perhaps, of the government on the fiscal policy and indirectly in defence of our good friend Hatip Basri, the Minister of Finance. And it goes something like this. The government is very heavily constrained politically on what it does in fiscal policy. So it came out with a rather toothless package. But it moved very fast and significantly on monetary policy. And I wonder whether the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Central Bank didn't get together and say, look, we've got a problem here. And I wonder whether the Minister of Finance might have said, well, look, you can act. No, we really can't. We can do a bit of window dressing. So I wonder if you might respond on that. You didn't really talk about monetary policy significantly in the discussion.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. That's right. The combination of, Prime Minister Abe had three arrows: monetary policy, fiscal policy, and structural policy. So that's not a bad framework. So certainly monetary policy comes into it. A question at the back there.
Thank you. My name is Marlisa from Crawford School, Australian National University. When we're talking about how to boost economic performance in Indonesia, it's an inevitable part of the experience that we also have to involve the creative economy or creative industry. And taking lesson learned from South Korea, where they can empower their digital entertainment and pop culture as one of the biggest source of income, how do you see the role or the influence of this creative economy in boosting the economic performance, and how to utilize the people or individuals in Indonesia as the major capital of creative industry in Indonesia? Thank you.
Baiklah, terima kasih Bu. Your work is out.
So I'll go first, and I'll answer all three questions and then let Moekti add, but basically I'm only going to even try to answer one of them. So the first one on economic nationalism, I agree with you. Economic nationalism is very evident in Indonesia, as it is from time to time in Australia, as it is in every country. And I think it's very, I think, you can even go one step back and say it's very natural for politicians and the public to fall into a rhetoric that governments create growth. And I think often that's not true. Governments stepping back and other people create growth. But that line of thinking can lead to a particular set of policy recommendations that probably isn't terribly helpful. And similarly for economic nationalism, Indonesia needs to be open to the rest of the world. It needs foreign capital. That's going to be a big part of its development path. Needs to be open to trade, needs to be open to labour movements as much as possible as well. So here's where I don't answer. In terms of how that's going to play out in the 2014 election, I have no idea, and maybe the people who are in the first session might have a better idea than us on the politics of that. I don't really have anything to add. I'll move on to the third question, because that's the other one I'm not really going to answer, and my answer is that I love Indonesian pop music, and if they can export it to the rest of the world, then all systems go. There's plenty on YouTube, but they're probably not getting enough money out of that, so maybe find a way to commercialise it. But in terms of the serious detail of your question, again, my answer, I work in Treasury, my answer would probably be that the government should get out of the way and not be trying to encourage these sorts of things. If pop music or other aspects of cultural creativity are things that Indonesia's good at, then that's probably going to happen without government assistance. So Chris's question, which is the one I'll try to do a little bit better on. I agree, we didn't really talk about monetary policy that much, and there were, Moekti did mention the monetary policy movements during August were probably the most successful parts of the package. We don't know whether the Finance Minister and the Government are spoke and how they strategised about that, but what we do know is the FCAR SSCAR did meet several times during August, so that's the body where you've got the Finance Minister, you've got the Central Bank Governor, you've got the head of the Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the head of the OJK, the new Financial Sector Supervisor. And that's exactly the role this body should play. They get together, they all have various responsibilities and accountabilities, and they figure out, given the nature of the challenge that we focus, which of our policy tools is the best one to use. And it may very well be that was a strategy coming out of that body. Fiscal policy, I agree with your your more favourable characterisation of the policy package, and we did have one of the points on our slide, maybe this is the best that could be achieved in the circumstances. So the politics heading into 2014 are more difficult to get bigger reforms, but there were a couple of sensible things in that package, including the delay of the ban or quotas on raw commodity exports that seemed pretty sensible and sort of had the mark of people who were looking for the opportunity to do some good things. So I accept your characterisation that there were some good things in there. And that was certainly the word on the street in Jakarta, where that people saw this as the best that could be achieved in the circumstances. So that's consistent with that. Sounds like it was the word on the street in Yogyakarta as well. Just a final comment on fiscal policy. Indonesia often talks about using fiscal policy, and I think they should be very cautious in the use of fiscal policy. So fiscal policy to respond to crises or to manage demand is a very difficult thing. It often doesn't work quickly, often hard to get the spending in place. If you try to do it too quickly, the quality of the spending can be very poor. If you're the only country doing fiscal policy, a lot of it's washed out in exchange rate movements, so a very difficult tool to use. This is sort of an aside, it's a niggling concern to me that Indonesia often talks about fiscal stimulus, and it's often in the context of very small movements in growth away from a target, and I think that's the wrong way to be thinking about it.
Okay, thank you. On the economic nationalism, I think there's a very good materials for the campaign, like presidential campaign, because somehow Indonesia still have this traumatic of the colonialism. So sometimes we see that the foreigner is bad. So I think I assume that some of the presidential candidates will use this nationalism, economic nationalism, as their campaign. But the problem is, if we want this economic nationalism is costly. Like, of course, we can produce everything in home, but on what cost? How much resources that we spend unnecessarily just to have this nationalism? So it's better if that resources be used for health and education. As you see in the graph, that the spending on health and education in Indonesia is quite low. Although the law already required like 20% of the budget is for education, but in fact, if we look at the actual spending on education, is less than 15%. Okay, so I think I think for the last year, we see that the trade policy becomes more restrictive. That we start to restrict the import, and also the value-added idea is also, some of it is more nationalistic, that we want to have more value added, we want to produce more in Indonesia, but once again, on what cost? And then I think it's better if we use that resources to more beneficial things. The second, on the creative industry. Yes, the creative industry is now developing. We have the Ministry for that Economic Creative under the Ministry of Tourism and Economic Creative, Ibu Mari Pangestu. And then not just central government, but actually local government now provide a space and opportunity for the local artists to showcase their result. For example, there's a lot of Bandung I think in Bandung and in Jogja, and also there's in Slawi, they have this parade, Slawi, Ngawi, something that showcase the artists in local region. So, but one thing that maybe can that government can do to develop more on the economic creatives is on the intellectual property rights, because that's the problem. That's one problem on the economic creative is how we protect the intellectual property rights. There's one discussion that we have, the SEADI had with the Ministry of the Tourism about the downloading songs in YouTube or in other online website, how we protect the IPR on those songs. So that's one, but the IPR is not under the Ministry of Tourism and the Creative Industry, but is under the Minister of Law and Human Resource. So there has to be a good coordination between ministries, which is unfortunately is quite lack in Indonesia, coordination between ministers. Okay, I already get a note from Pak Peter, so I stop here, Pak.
Terima kasih, Bu Moekti. As an economist, I would just like to note that this discussion, Chris Manning, Jason, Bu Moekti, about the balance between monetary policy and fiscal policy is nearly always an issue when a government is trying to respond quickly to a situation. From the economics point of view, monetary policy is often faster. The decisions can be taken faster and they translate through to the markets faster. On the other hand, there is often a question as to the reliance on fiscal policy. Here in Australia, the former Prime Minister Rudd used fiscal policy very aggressively back in the 2008-2009 period when we had issues in Australia. But I'm not trying to comment on which is the most appropriate, but it is always a dilemma for governments in responding to this situation. I think we've got time for 3 more questions before lunch. I'll take one from Terry Hull. If someone could pass a microphone to Pak Terry Hull. I've got another one up at the back. If someone could then pass a microphone up to the back there, and then yang ketiga di tengah ini, if you could pass the microphone of all. I'll take just one more from over here. Ada wanita. I'll take you, Ibu. Yeah. Okay. Jadi 1, 2, 3, 4. Pak Terry.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presenters. I was shocked to see the bar graph with the health and education expenditures. And I wonder if you could comment on it, because when you talk about improving the outcomes in health and education, of course there's been a lot of change recently in public versus private expenditure, and then also centralized budgets versus local budgets. Did your bar graph show all of that, or was it just the central government budget? And if it's just the central government budget, what's happening with the rest of the governments, the district government?
Thank you very much, Terry. We have a second question up there. Silakan, Pak. Just identify yourself, Pak.
My name is Rudy Purba from AMSAT International and also Australian Indonesia Business Council as well. We spoke quite a lot about MP3EI lately, I think also inside the Business Council as well. And we, based on the study that done in Japan recently, I think quite 2 or 3 years back, and also another study that they found that actually when you put a lot of budget coming into specific areas, so let's say capital cities, I'm talking about acceleration and expansion of economy here, regional, improving the regional development, regional economy. So if you put too much money, let's say in Jakarta, Surabaya, and Medan, for instance, you forget completely that you need more money to focus in several other areas. And also another question is when you put a lot of money, let's say in Papua, for instance, in Sorong, because you're thinking about one corridor there in Papua, then in fact, that's not really productive at the moment. Now you have to think about specific areas, priority there. So I haven't seen any study before. Where can you put, where actually the priority? Where do you put the money precisely? Whether you go to Sumatra first, because we are talking about time here. We're talking about education, of course, very important, but also timing that you can improve the GDP as well at the same time. So there's no balance, or there's no study about balance there. Is there anything that you can suggest to the government, whether they have to do study first and then go to Papua, whether they go to Ambon, whatever? Thank you.
Terima kasih. Yang ketiga.
Terima kasih.
Pak. Ya, namanya Pak.
Udin, Pak Peter. I'm from Bappenas, Government of Indonesia and University of Queensland. I'm proud to see two Indonesian women are sitting there. Okay, it's about election next year. Pak Peter already talked that fiscal policy and monetary policy should be convergent, how to respond our currency crisis. But in fiscal policy, I would say that the next year, government will increase deficit because of the realization of subsidies will be higher than the plan because of the currency makes our full subsidy higher than what the plan. And then this is about in medium term our fiscal sustainability. It will be worsening, or I want to say that it's the main question, how to deal with that, about currency crisis, how to deal with fiscal policy. Thank you.
Makasih, Pak. And the last question from over here, Ibu, if we could have a microphone. And if you could just tell us where you are from, Ibu. Terima kasih, ya.
My name is Sri from Monash University. My question is directly to Ibu Mira. I'm really interested what you presented about the impact of macroeconomic to the equity and then also the well-being of people. So I just wonder whether you see and you have analyzed about the future leaders right now. So what do you think, which party or which leader might be influenced to your interests? I just want to ask you questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Golput boleh, Bu.
Okay, thank you. No, I have a opportunity first. For Pak Terry Hall, yeah, the graph that we show is just for the central government. So it's just from RAPBM 2014. So the health and the education is what the health and education sector in central government. Unfortunately, we haven't get any information on the district expenditure on health and in education. But our prediction is that it's not, if we add also the local government, maybe the ratio between the subsidy and the health and education expenditure is not that bad, because we have the local government also have their own program for the health and education. But we will try to look at each regional government expenditure to be able to see that. But thank you for the suggestion. On the MP3AE, actually, this is my own observation. The MP3AE is just the compilation of what government and private wants to do in a specific region. So there is no really, so the government is only compiling what each region plan of investment during 2000, if I'm not mistaken, is 2008 until 2013. So there's no real improvement, because it's just the compilation of already planned investment and infrastructure for each region. However, if you go to the website of KP3AE, I just found out like 3 days ago that they claim that they already some realization of those plans. The highest one is still in Jawa, but if I'm not mistaken, the realization in Papua is like 8% of the plan list of investment. So I remember my first reaction when that time Ministry of Planning Agency came to Canberra and explaining about the MP3AE. She said that now the government have priority sector for the development. I already start ready with my plan and want to write down what the priority. And she said that we have 23 sectors as a priority. I said 23 sector is not a priority. So that time I was like, okay, so it's just business as usual. Although they have said that it's MP3E, but my observation is just business as usual. So the government should have courage, I think, courage to decide which they want to prioritize. Sumatra, Kalimantan, just pick one. If the other region complain, give the reasonable explanation. Okay, if Java complains that Java is already overpopulated, there's a lot of industry here, that's why we move it to other island. But the government have to decide, not just like the MP3E, it's just a collection of each region. And it tends to be a public-private partnership, but once again, what's in it for the private sector? Should be any incentive for private sector. The reason why they're not doing that, because there's no incentive for them. So the government task is have to provide the incentive for the private sector, so they're willing to invest outside Java, I think. For the election, I think Jason is more expert on that.
I'll just answer the question from the gentleman from Bapanas on debt. So again, I don't want to appear too sanguine, but I think the debt dynamics for Indonesia are very good, and even running a deficit of 2 or 3% is not a problem, and the debt burden has been coming down for Indonesia quite a lot. Similarly, private sector debt, there's probably a lot better management of the debt than there was, say, in 97. So don't want to be too sanguine, but that all looks much better than it did. The point I'd make there is there's probably a lot better things Indonesia could be spending its money on, and that's probably more the focus. So rather than trying to rein in the deficit, think about quality of spending is more important. And Moekti's chart on fuel subsidies versus other parts of the budget, that's one aspect of that. But probably even within parts of the budget, focusing on making sure that you're getting good returns for the spending that you're doing is probably the most important thing. And as any of you who have dealt with the Ministry of Finance knows, one of the challenges in Indonesia is actually spending the money. Which isn't a challenge that Australia has typically. So it's a kind of, and the question on the election, Moekti will answer over lunch.
Ibu Mira, you had a specific question to you, Bu.
I think in regards to the questions about who is a political leader, who is a political leader and suitable for the election as a president, I think we'll need to wait and see first, because then we haven't actually seen any policy, a specific policy toward the direction. But I think what actually my observation here in terms of poverty actually continues reducing, but inequality is actually up. And then I guess I think everyone take on this. I think regardless whoever the presidents, then they need actually to tackle that issue. I think, yeah. So we have to just wait and see. I guess it's really hard to predict who has that capacity at the moment to really like overcome that issue. And I think I just want to have a little bit comment about the MP3E. I guess it's like the idea is probably is good, because it's actually transferring the center of development from Java to other areas as well, like particularly for the eastern Indonesia. But I guess it's again the challenges is like how is the reality, as Uti already mentioned. I guess one room that I can see is like because the MP3 is trying to utilize the strength of each region. I think I can see the room like to strengthening the education sector, like to create the human capital or skills that required for that particular region, like to develop or to establish the strength of region as well to contribute to the labor market. So I think that is possible sector or I think coordination between education and then also labor market in each of the region. I think that's probably it. Yeah, thank you.
Terima kasih, Bu. We have a very important event coming up in just a few minutes, and it's lunch. But before this important event, there are just two things that we have to do. First of all, on your behalf, I would like to thank all of the two speakers and the commentator today.